Hello, I'm Steve, and this is Wind and Raven. I'm going to make this the opening of a new chapter of Wind and Raven, which is a project that began back when I was terminally ill, back about 12 years ago. This is 2026 now, on a Facebook page that I made, and it was a series of posts that I made about having terminal liver failure, and it went all the way up through the time I had cancer and everything else, until the time that all that was no longer the case. Then I traveled. Then I stopped posting. So by around 2 years ago, it's been nothing. That era is all looked at as one chunk now. This is going to be a new era of Wind and Raven that begins today. And instead of doing an introduction of myself, what I am going to do is to sort of go through a presentation I have of my book, This Is How It Feels to Heal, and talk about the various parts of the book, the story as it goes along. I'll read some quotes from it. You'll see some general ideas from it. And it chronicles the time from, diagnosis of terminal illness in 2010 through transplant in 2019, and then me leaving the United States. And the reason I want to do this is that I'm thinking of adding a second part to the book. And it may, in fact, end up being literally the conversation we are about to have. This is how it feels to heal, a shamanic journey through cancer, life challenges, and recovery. This is a story of 8 years of terminal diagnosis between 2011 and 2019. It's set in my tone here is going to be me reflecting on the book 4 years later. The book itself is kind of sloppy because a lot of it is posted literally from Facebook posts that I made while I was sick, and I decided to leave it raw. And so at times it can be kind of hard to understand. So I'm going to take a look at it here as we go along. And so this is how it feels to heal. I'll explain how it came to be named that. And we're going to go chapter by chapter. I've got a presentation, as you can see here on the screen. I've got quotes from the book, and then I'll be reading from the screen you're looking at, and I'm going to sort of add some other things along the way. I'm not going to retell the entire story, just touch on some of the major themes that the book brings. So here we go. This is a quote that I made during the time. We move through life wearing labels handed to us. Our name, our diagnosis, what success is. I've never really lived inside mainstream society anywhere. High school dropout, last boss 1990, self-employed online since 1997. So when everything I'd been told turned out to be wrong, I was already equipped to throw it out the window and start seeing instead of just looking. And so I began to ask, when this began, who were you before your name? Could I even think of things like that? And most of what we see is just our memory confirming that what it is. How do we know? I started the impact of this mindset that has immediately come with the beginning of this book brought me to these places in the first months. I began to say things like life is, and anything we add beyond that is our opportunity of it. Is it good? Or excuse me, our opinion of it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it happy? Is it whatever? It's life, regardless of that secondary word. And so there's always ways to look at life. I followed my 4-year-old down to the basement, blacked out, woke up at the bottom of the stairs talking to someone my wife couldn't see. The ER found a blood alcohol level near 5%, but that wasn't one day of drinking. My liver had quietly stopped filtering. Stage 4 cirrhosis, MELD score of 17. They gave me 6 months. I said, I don't buy your myth of death. That's the first chapter of the book. And I literally said that when they said that I had between 6 months and 3 years to live. And so stage 4 liver failure, 6 months to 3 years. The day after I blacked out and fell down a flight of steps. We don't have to accept what has not happened. as necessarily what will happen, something I wrote during the time. But leading up to this, the Grateful Dead years, coast to coast twice. Then 1997, I jumped into the early web, helped Deadheads after the Grand Forks flood, made National Public Radio, NPR, Morning Edition. That same year, UGAsports.com was born. I built it into one of the biggest names in college sports, 12,000 plus paying subscribers monthly, the backbone of what became Rivals.com. And the whole time, alone in my office and drinking with the lifestyle while finishing off my liver. So that was a long, strange trip. I followed the Grateful Dead after getting out of the Army in 1988, more or less up until the time Jerry Garcia died, but particularly during the 90, 91, 92 times. Here you see 11 months on the road following the Dead. Then from one bedroom to Oregon, I built UGA Sports, a pioneer online. Now, what happened is when Jerry Garcia died, of course, I left 14 years at the helm. It was actually longer than that. I don't know, it was a typo. But I had the tagline on UGA Sports when it was first started in 1997 and into 1998. Newspapers read us. We don't read them. We were pioneers on the internet. And we grew so fast. Those next years leading up to the diagnosis, it just went up and up and up. And my income was very good. I was able to hire staff members and pay them all. But quickly what happens and where the book goes is when the impact of all of this starts to hit, not me psychologically as in losing hope. I surrounded myself with hope. But that doesn't stop things like hepatic encephalopathy. And that is a condition where your liver is no longer filtering and kicking back into your bloodstream. Ultimately, things that are carried up into your mind, clog up your mind, causes all kinds of confusion. From the book. The liver stops filtering. Toxins hit the brain. Confusion, memory loss, blackouts. I'd wake up in a different room or at a stoplight in the next town with no memory of driving there. I described it as my soul spiraling down a drain through my body into the earth. I stayed at stage 4 from 2011 till 2015. I hid how bad it was. I didn't want to be labeled or limited. This is me reflecting in the book. This is not written at the time. This is me when I was in the ashram in 2021, typing. And so this was an awful experience. This was by far the worst experience of the entire thing, was when you just had this total confusion at times, unable to finish sentences, start sentences, complete complex thinking on the simplest thing, tying your shoe, typing in my password. I talk about this in the book. I once had to have my daughter come and type in my password because I kept typing it so many times wrong. And this is sober. When I left that hospital, I stopped drinking. I stopped doing everything. So this is now getting into year 1, year 2. So the drain at the center of my body, cirrhosis. In 2017, there's going to be more about this, but in 2017, I later found out that I had hepatitis C. That was also munching away during this time. It was undiagnosed for 6 years. I had gone to the doctor a couple of times for blood tests and things like that during the time, but I had no regular care. I had turned somewhere else for that care. But the hepatic encephalopathy, it was just awful. This is the way that I said it at the time. Picture your brain as a city. Now randomly shut down streets. Rinse and repeat. Hepatic, HE, as this week referred to it. So another thing that happened during that time was, well, Steve has been drinking for an awful long time. Perhaps give him something to do also because I couldn't really work anymore. He should go to AA meetings. I did that. And I literally, as you see the quote here, I stood up and said, I have nothing in common with any of you after they went around and introduced themselves. I didn't feel that I did. And I walked out. You'll later see that I do value therapy. But that wasn't for me at that time. And so there's my first AA meeting. So more to say about this. I wrote this in the book. I came to respect that healing starts with, wait, this is from the book. I heard the introductions and felt alienated. Said my line, I have nothing in common with any of you. And I left. But that walking out was the real start. I went vegetarian, then vegan, gave up junk food, and decided nothing I had known before was valid anymore. I started undoing my own mind. The hardest addiction to break is being right, I began to say. This is the immediate aftermath. This is within the first couple of weeks of the diagnosis. That's when the AA thing was, because I think they referred me to that at the doctor's office. I did. I went vegetarian and I mean, all the way very quickly. Gave up literally everything. I threw religion out the window. I threw every belief. I threw everything out. Nothing, because nothing was right. The situation had gone from so wonderful to being dead within 180 days, theoretically. But I was going to live through it. So none of that was right. So if that's not right, if death isn't even right, the rest of that stuff pales, right? Think about the fear of death. How many other things are we more afraid of than that? So if I'm going to reject that, everything else is secondary and whatever. This is the way that I thought about it at the time. I obviously see the world differently today, but I stand behind the way that went, because otherwise, how do you live when everything around you is telling you you're going to die? I don't know if I tell the story in the book, but I had taken my daughter and my son, they were younger at the time, we would have been driven there. I didn't drive, maybe, to a theater to see The Lorax, the movie The Lorax, I think it is, the one where I speak for the trees, whatever that is. And I'm sitting there with HE watching this, and it occurred to me that I've been thinking about this in somewhat the wrong way. I was only thinking about me, and everything was sort of just upstairs, but this liver and this everything else was involved. What does it want to do? I oddly thought, who speaks for the liver? And so this began what ultimately becomes the ceremony for the body. Because what I did is, and I won't go into it, you can read the book, but in the ceremony of the body, I checked I let all the parts of my body speak. I would listen to it. And maybe it was spiritual, because I was also getting into shamanism at this time, looking into shamanic practitioners and hanging out with them. Not hanging out, but reading their stuff, going and meeting some and things like that. But it also was the HE, no doubt. But I was able to connect with them all, and I let them all speak, and I would listen to them, and I would not only just say, how do they physically feel, but how do they feel? What do they have to say? And you can read exactly how this all went down. It turned into a very interesting whole scene, you could say. But as a result of all this, this is how it went in the book, the way that I wrote it. So this is from the book. The single most influential act in my mind-body connection. In a deep journey, I found a teepee. I sat down and I said, it's time for the ceremony of the body. Each part of my body took its place. The liver had never had a voice to warn me, and I just worked through every night until it couldn't. So I put the whole body in its service, told my taste buds to only send good signals for things that are good for me. And at night, I asked each part of my body to send any unused healing to the liver that night. Foods that I hated suddenly tasted fine. I'm referring in this instance to broccoli, which it oddly, after transplant, no longer tasted good. And so I said, I'm Steve. I speak for the liver, just like in the Lorax. That's the heart of how the ceremony of the body came. And this became a central thing that I started doing in about 2013, all the way till post-transplant, about the time I wrote this book. I no longer do it like that. I don't know why. Maybe I'm healed. There's always more healing, but you never know. So what I did is I renamed my taste buds the ambassadors of nutrition. This was the beginning of me changing the names of things into something that was even better than the way it was currently named. If it was good for me, it would taste good. It worked immediately. Quote from the book elsewhere. Now I move deeper into shamanism. I've been completely vegan now for probably 3 years. The ceremony of the body is already going, and I deepen. And I went to visit a woman. Her name was Barbara Odell in Athens, Georgia. She was an older woman that, well, maybe my age at that time, but to me seemed older. This was, 10, 15, 12 years ago at this point, 13. And she was a local shamanic practitioner, and she and another woman, Christy Gray, were very good friends. And I had been working with Christy in shamanic stuff as well, going over to her place. And so people in Athens at the time will know both these people. But I met with Barbara on our own, and I was talking to her about, I have kind of a different situation going on here because I've got this physical body that's possibly, it's struggling. And she said, why don't you go on a rune quest? Because she knew that for the last 10 years leading up to this, I'd been immersed in studying Viking culture, particularly the 500 and 600 pre-Viking era, but also that era. But just interested in the Baltics during the time leading up to Lindensfarne, which is the beginning of the Viking Age. And so I immediately thought RuneQuest, isn't that a game? But then she said, no, do it. Just go and journey and go on a rune quest. And so this is where I talk in the book about making the blood runes. I won't go into all the details about where the parts came from. It took almost a year to do once I had the runes carved. Now, maybe it was about a week per rune, 24. Yeah. So basically what happens, I carved 24 rounds out of Norwegian oak, sealed them in Danish oil, and a few drops of my own blood. I cut my hand and put it in the bowl. And then I sat with each one for 2 weeks. And so that, close to a year. How many? Yeah, a year. Full year. Wow, that was a long time. Anyway, for that bag right there, they are in that bag. The entire collection was put in that bag when it was made. And they're still there today. They're one of the few things that I have with me now that I'm living outside the United States. I only left with my luggage, though I've since moved some other things. That was with me when I arrived. They haven't left my side since that. The way that I did it, the shamanic path deepening, Sather, the Norse expression of shamanism, in the Celtic otherworld, a place near me. I went on a rune quest, made my own runes from scratch, included my own blood the old way, and let them teach me. My ordinary reality was already so out of body from the HE that leaving it for the spirit world was easier. Heimdallr and Danu became where every journey began. Danu, of course, is part of the I almost said Teotihuacan, Tuatha Danann, which is the oldest Celtic gods in Ireland. Danu is not an embodiment. Danu is basically nature, though she is sometimes, I say she, is sometimes put as a female goddess. In truest, oldest form, it had no form. And of course, all of the Nordic, none of them truly had form, but we've since done that. I wanted to stay away from all that along this way, so I refused to watch anything about Vikings or learn anything about them. And when I had done the runes prior to getting into studying Sather, I didn't even know what any one of the runes meant. This is what I talk about in the book. So I named them my own things. I gave them all their own meanings, and they worked for me in that way. I'm not trying to replicate Nordic stuff because I'm not living in 500 or 790. All right. And that's just the way that I approach that. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. And I took them and they spoke to me in the way they did. and the HE and the shamanic journeying all during this time, I created a whole world in there, and it gave me paths forward that stayed on the positive path as the years rolled by. The 3 years were long gone by now. We're now into like 14 and 15. So this is when 15, in July of 2015, I had heard my doctor in the hallway, not doctor, but a person I went to once a year to get a blood test. He was talking to somebody, and I was telling, he knew I had really bad HE because I'd slurred and everything. And I heard him talking to the doctor in the hall, and the doctor said that they had some experimental kind of drug or something. I knew it had to be a drug rep. And so right after that, he comes in and says there's this new clinical trial drug or whatever called rifaximin. I think it's called one. Anyway, today it's got the opposite name. It went from, anyway, it's something faxin, rifaximin and gisaxin. It was the earliest form of that. And they said it was for people with Crohn's disease, but it was also somehow helping people that had HE. Would I like to try it? And I did. And right off the bat, I was back to like 80% cognitive form. And that was enough to function more or less. I'd still have it bouts with HE, and I don't talk about it here. Maybe I get into it in the book later. But my diet, when I went vegetarian and all that, I also had to craft a diet that we'd learned by a study that we'd found in Australia that it's about 2013, that if you kept my protein under 20 grams a day, so I'm wasting away now and not moving. I got pretty thin, but then I got other ways I got bloated along the way because of the sickness. But muscle-wise was going fast. So I could only have 20 grams per day, and it couldn't be animal. So that complicated things even more. And so that was going on during this time. But so when I was back from the HE, it cleared that up for the most part. And I was very strict about my diet by this point. So I was able to, I met with Larry Walton, the owner of Recovery Cafe, the person that I had met with for about twice or 3 times back when this first started, just to see where I was at. And so he invited me to come to his Recovery Cafe recovery group and to speak to them about living through the end of the world type of thing. And the reason he did is because the people in the drug and alcohol sessions, some of them were treating having to give up these habits as sort of like the end of the world. Like it could be with your social community or even family, you could say, or maybe it's somehow associated with your job even. That it makes it challenging because you might have to like change your life. You no longer have the same friends. You can still go to the same places. So they were speaking about it like that. And he said, well, Steve, you've been alive. Basically, he said, you've been more or less, you've been alive for 2 years now, past the time they said you, and you haven't been going to doctors. Why don't you come in and talk to the group about what it's like to really go through losing everything in the way that it happened and denying that change as being something fundamentally negative, basically. I did that. And so Larry Walton, social worker, we are just pieces of the action, he told me. Christy Gray and the Cobweb. All the answers are with you. You just need the right question. Lujan Matus, another person I was very fond of, book was a clarion call. That was the art of stalking parallel perception. And Jonathan Horowitz in Sweden, he gave me the most important phone call in this entire thing. We'll get to that on the next page, but Jonathan ends up being his words. So this quote here, can you see a heart in another, is in my book, and I attribute it to who I got it from, and that is from Lujan Matus, who is a shamanic practitioner of sorts. That he calls himself otherwise, but he'd be put in that category. And he's a Nagual. But he said that, and it's in Art of Stalking Parallel Perception, among other things. And that really made me even look at us and others, and are we the same? Because we're all born the same. So therefore, anybody that's doing anything is the result of their conditions and things that have happened. Can I still see the original them, or do I judge them by it? And so I started really pondering these things, and these are great points. So Larry Walton, Christy Gray, Lou Hamatus, Jonathan Horowitz, each one moved me further down the path. And they came basically, well, sort of, actually not in that order at all. So Christy, though, was the beginning of all this. In 2013, she decided she wanted to pass on some of her knowledge to some people for the first time. And so she invited 6 people, I think it was, to do this. And I was the only man. And I said, yes, I'll do it. So we spent about 9 months meeting all the time. She had this little like hobbit house out in the woods called Rockingwood for people in Athens that know the time and have been friends with me, and maybe even friends with her. But it was the most surreal place. It was literally like walking into something like out of high art fantasy Scotland in the day, And so um, I asked her one time when we were sitting there about where do you get your answers? And she said literally this: when I have a deep question, I ask a cobweb. I don't, if I get my answer, I ask it another way. So basically, what she's getting at here, she might literally have had a cobweb. And I've done that since. I've done that from time to time because it works, because it has all the ways you can possibly go with this. And so you find a way that works, and that's your answer. You get your answer yourself by staring into the cobweb. And so you can take that to a psychological level and say the more you see the things around you and the more you're aware of them, all the things going on in your life, the better it is to come up with why things might not be going not as well in another area. And so this was going on now around the same time as I'm moving into being a facilitator for that recovery group that I was talking about, because I was there the first week and I never left. As of the recording of this, I'm still there. I've missed it twice since that, the day I got my liver transplant and the day my daughter graduated high school. I wrote this in the book about my early year there, my first year at Recovery Cafe, being a facilitator of this group at the time, and also becoming a certified recovery coach during this time. Again, the Xifaxan was able to get me cognitive, but I had to keep taking it. If I stopped taking it in 24 hours, I was right back to Alice in Wonderland. Once the experimental drug Xifaxan cleared my mind, I had room to do something. Larry brought me into Recovery Cafe. I didn't use best practices. I used mythology, consciousness, and my own story. It rattled the credentialed staff, but it was reaching clients. One of them called me his sage. I said, I'm no sage, I'm Steve. That's all, and that's enough. That was the same guy that then said this over here. Half the time, I don't know what Steve is talking about, but it all makes perfect sense. I was using all of these examples from mythology, you could say, or spirituality, the way that because a lot of it was just seemingly coming together of various gods and goddesses, and from basically Celtic and Nordic traditions, almost exclusively from there, along with things perhaps like Beowulf and some of the other auxiliary type stuff from that time. Certainly to some degree, the darker sides of that when you get into Europe, talking about some of the ways that it changes when you get into more of the Slavic areas. It's maybe not as rosy as it might appear in others. And a lot of the way we look at the rosy is a result of just the last 150 years interpretation of it. All of it had its brights and darks. But I would find ways to get across these. I could tell what the group was aimed at and use that way of explaining how to get through it. And so I began to work. So about my first 4 years, I talked to about 50 clients. The reason 4 years is important because this is up until the time of transplant. Then I had been at Recovery Cafe for about 2 years. This brings us to 2017. The phone rang. I was on Highway 316. My 10-year-old daughter was beaming next to me on top of the world, headed to see Dead and Company in Atlanta. I just put the phone down. Okay. We're going to delete a lot of what just became before this. You'll see those are false calls. Okay, now the teaser arrives. We're in 2017. A friend of mine had reminded me that I was a veteran. He said, "Why don't you go to the VA, Steve? They'll give you all the care you need." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I did. And they did. And I'll be forever grateful for them for that. But at any rate, I had appointments in nearby Augusta, Georgia. And in September, they told me I had hepatitis C. That's when we found that out, 6 years after this whole thing began. And then the following month, they called and said, "You have 2 tumors in your liver, Steve." All right. Now it is late November. My daughter and I are driving down Highway 316. She is so happy. We're going to see Dad's band that he has all over the house. The whole house had Grateful Dead stuff. They had Grateful Dead shirts. I still had all my thousands of hours of Grateful Dead tapes. I was very still active in the Grateful Dead community and dressing that way. And I had long hair and all this. And particularly now, because I've been sick for a long time, my beard was ridiculously long and everything. And then on top of that, being Mystical's dad that was into Vikings and things. So to them, I had created this. They were sort of in this world with me. Luckily, they were at an age where they didn't think that was particularly weird, really know what was going on. They knew I was sick, of course. But we had tickets to see Dead and Company in Atlanta, so she was finally getting to go. And so I answered the phone, and they told me that the 2 tumors had cancer. Okay, I've got cancer. I've got liver cancer. I put the phone down and just kept driving. And that's when I really started to really that was one of the moments when I didn't succumb. But at that moment, first thought is because we'd been talking about buying t-shirts, I was like, I shouldn't be buying a t-shirt. I'm not gonna be around to wear it at this stage in the game. What's it gonna be now? The next prognosis, 3 months, 9 months. And so I started thinking in that way. But I didn't give up. And I really let it go at that point. We drove on a few more miles. We went to the Hard Rock Cafe, had, all the whatever. She had a burger. I probably couldn't have. I probably had a salad because back to the protein issue and HE. But I was on the Xifaxan, so I was close. I was probably around 90% by this time, or like 2 years into taking the Xifaxan. And we went to the show and had a great time, and it was great. But I didn't tell anybody. Not then. What I did is I waited about 2 weeks before I started telling people. And then it got to about the 2-week mark. I made a post on the Wind and Raven Facebook page. And it said, do I have the quote here? No, but it said, "Hey, everybody, I've got some heavy news, but it's good. I have cancer." I left it at that. And the reason it was good is because the VA had since told me in those 12 days that they were going to put me on a fast track to get up to where I was going to ultimately go to, let's see if we can resolve this whole thing. So I was like, wow, here they are. Look at the VA. I haven't talked to anybody in the Army or related to that since the 80s. And here comes the Army to save me. And I was very excited about that. I had all the belief in the world that at least now we had we had somebody on the outside saying I was going to live. We had somebody on the outside that finally believed I was going to live. I don't know how many people around me during that time, family, friends, anybody really thought I was. I mean, there's this guy that has HE at times, and all Mystical Steve now is Shamanic Steve, and I don't know what they thought. I've really not asked many, or meaningful ways. But what happened was when I posted that, within just a couple of minutes from that, I received a communique from Sweden, from Jonathan Horowitz at the Scandinavian Shamanic Society's webpage. I believe that's the name of it. I'm sorry, Jonathan, if I'm saying that wrong. And so we talked. And he said, "Steve, that's the last time you're going to call it cancer. It's your teacher." And I was like, wow. It was easy for me to grasp on 2 fronts. One, I was already in the business of renaming things to something that was more appropriate, that would help me. And he said that you're going to learn how now to, go forward or something along that line. And immediately it was it. I began calling it the teacher. And I went on to call it the teacher up until after transplant. I would never say that I had cancer again. I had a teacher. and I needed to listen to the teacher, do what it said, and we would work together, and I wouldn't need to be taught anymore, which was something that Christy Gray used to say about herself. She was the teacher and the taught. In this instance, though I had by this time gotten into somewhat doing journey work for other people in shamanism, I certainly wasn't a teacher, but I was about to be taught. Because after all, the hardest addiction to break is being right. We can always learn more. And so then came uh, David Bothy into my life about this somewhere around here, and he had he had his own thing going on. He was not a shamanic practitioner by any measure. He never claimed to be. He didn't want that, but he was a fascinating individual and great man, and had all kinds of he collected crystals from all over the world and all kinds of stuff. Very, very good guy, and so he started talking about beauty breaks and things like that. And at the same time, a beauty break could be a moment just to stand in awe of everything is beautiful in the world, because it is so beautiful if you just look at it, without judgment. And at the same time, I was working with Jeannie Trogue, who is a Celtic practitioner out of Minnesota, doing like a 2-year thing on Celtic shamanism. And she had come up with Beautiful Too. And so this was a beautiful time. I had, cancer is there and all these other things. And so the teacher's here. And so what I began to do is exactly what she said, is you go through, like, take a walk, and everything you see, no matter what it is, you say that thing's beautiful and the other thing's beautiful too, no matter what they are. So beautiful is the flower, and beautiful too is cancer, my teacher, for it makes me love life even more. Back to that life I was going to live. These things just compiled and just piled and added on to the fact that I was able to stay so far above succumbing to the negative feelings of, oh, I'm doomed, and I don't want to say it like that for anybody that's in this position, but from giving up hope. That's the best way to say, giving up belief in yourself. You knew it was absolutely going to happen. And if we think otherwise, now we're going down the wrong road, and we were only going to go down the right road. But after the VA came in, I went up to Pittsburgh, where I ended up getting ultimately my liver transplant. And I started this period of my life where I had to go down to the community-based outpatient program in Athens and give blood. And it was like 20 vials at its peak. And it would be each Tuesday. And it started to, it got all over my arms. They couldn't do certain veins. And this went on for quite some time. And it was during this time that I ultimately get to the title of the book here in a minute. But so also during this time, I had been going and getting banded, where they would put rubber bands, keep my throat, but I had varices enlarged because of the liver backup, the pressure in my veins, my throat, and then they put rubber bands around them in case I coughed, I wouldn't hemorrhage, because they wouldn't be able to stop it. While during the looking for all of this, doing all the tests in Pittsburgh, I volunteered for a couple of different things during this time too. There's 3 in total, but the constant scanning and the constant giving blood became just something that turned into an almost blur. But I didn't like it, particularly the needles, because that was what led to this hepatitis C back in the 80s, which we ultimately find out when I was a brief period of doing needles and sharing them. It's the only explainable place where it could have come from, because by the time it was detected, I was already compounding with liver and then also liquor, but it was way more advanced than it should have been for my age. And so they decided, Steve, we have an option for you. How would you like us to go into your liver and then into those tumors and zap them with, I guess, chemotherapy or something like that? And then to immediately go in after that and cauterize them, make them into little cocoon. And so that's exactly what happened. Getting the taste treatment was one of the single most painful moments of this entire thing because what they needed to do. So now about getting TACE and then also getting the liver biopsy of the cancer tumor. And so to do this, they had to go down and get into the tumors without nicking my femoral artery, which was right next to it. And because that would have caused me to bleed out. So I had to lay on my side, have my lungs fully expanded so that it moved the liver enough to where it wasn't close to that vein, but I couldn't be knocked out. And the only way in is through my chest. So they started, I remember hearing it go through the layers like the cartilage. It was the most painful experience ever, but he couldn't yell because if I yelled, it would get rid of my lungs and I would know that I would have been the one that did this. But it was the most painful thing of this entire experience, this entire road of this whole story. It was so strong that I began to pass out, still with my chest inflated, quasi pass out, but I've pictured myself falling all the way to the bottom of like a dark, dark cavern or whatever. And I was just about to hit the bottom and I was at the very end of the rope and I held on at that last second. And I thought to myself, if I let go now, I just give up. This is over. It's all over. But I held on to it. And then I remember them shaking me and I woke up and it was so much pain. And I don't even remember really. I remember, it's funny, I see myself from behind leaving. This is really weird. I remember it almost from a third person perspective, seeing them wheel me out. I remember I was all hunched over. I remember being hunched. I remember being in pain. I don't remember leaving, but I remember that scene. That's strange. That was quite a day. TACE was when they decided we're going to go up and try to zap the tumors. And if you make it 6 months with this new testing thing we're doing, it will raise your MELD score up. MELD score is what moves you higher up on priority on the transplant list. Now I was on the transplant list, by the way. The VA put me on the transplant list. Prior to that, I wasn't even on it for those first 6 years. And so, so that was uncomfortable. It wasn't super painful. They had to go in through my leg both times. They went up and zapped them, then went right back up and cauterized around them, made them into like little cocoons so they couldn't escape. And so the deal was if I did not have more tumors or those grew after 6 months, I would be fine. And it's about this same time that I was getting so many shots and everything else. And that other thing had happened with the getting the biopsy through the chest. I was literally sitting in something as simple as sitting at the nurse's station, getting ready to get the blood work. And they went and they were getting ready to stick the needle in there. And I was like, no more of this. And I leaned back and I thought to myself, you know what? This nurse is not trying to hurt me. This needle has no opinion of any of this. Nothing is trying to hurt me at all. This is how it feels to heal. Probably not in that eloquent at the time, but that's when the thought came. This is how it feels to heal. And she put the needle in and I couldn't feel it. This went on until after transplant, the inability I had to feel physical pain when I put my mind to it. In these situations, when it involved doctors, that's a better way to put it. I will no longer call it pain. This is how it feels to heal. That's what I said shortly thereafter. So now we're past the point where I'm approved to be moved up on the MELD score. I'm high up. Now we're in November of 2018. And this part of the story, you can read extensively this whole story in the book. It's much more, I don't want to get into it too deep here because it is still pretty profound in my soul. You can read it more about it, but they called me up and they said, first off, I'm an O negative. So that means there's fewer livers I can take. I'm hepatitis C. They asked me, Steve, would you be willing to take hepatitis C liver on top of that? Another test we're going to do. And then after you're done, we're going to get rid of the hep C after you get transplanted. Because right now your liver is not strong enough to handle that process. I say, heck yeah. So now I'm doubled down. Now I'm waiting for transplant person, a donor. It has O negative blood and has hepatitis C. But then I got the phone call. This is early November. And I went up there. I was all excited. I posted on Facebook, "Oh, yeah, I'm going." And everybody was cheering. I had like 5,000 followers. And I got up there, and Dr. Ceccarelli, my doctor at the Pittsburgh VA Medical Center, where I was getting all this done, he came in after I'd been laying there on the bed for a couple hours and said, "Steve, we're not going to give you the liver." And I was like, "Well, why not?" And he goes, "Because it's not good enough for you, and you're going to live a long time." Again, that's why I chose Dr. Ceccarelli, who they had said, "Dr. Ceccarelli, if you're watching this, I'm sure you're aware of this." But when they let me pick my transplant places, I had 5 to pick from, and all of them were nice and nice and nice. This was better than the other, but this blah, blah, blah. But then there was the one that was the best. That was Pittsburgh. The problem there is that the patients never got along with the doctor. He was, I guess, hard to get along with. Dr. Ceccarelli and I hit it off from day one. I never had any negative interaction. So for him to say that meant a lot, because we were working together, and I knew I was working with the best transplant surgeon in the country, or at least that's the way everybody talked about it. And so I'm in, I guess, but I was destroyed. I went back to Georgia and I posted on Facebook, "It didn't happen. I have nothing more to say." And this begins a dark spin. This is leading into the time in December where I start saying to myself, is this going to be my last Christmas? Because I also have this cancer thing going on. They're not growing, but my body was beginning to really feel the toll of all those years, 7 years at this point. And so, excuse me. And so that was that. That was Christmas. I hadn't told anybody that I kind of given up in a way. I had hope, but I also now saw that it was now 50-50. Then, after Christmas, I got back to Georgia. I'm sitting in my apartment. I live alone by now. Family and all that broke up in 2015. I moved out on my own in 2017. And so I was in my apartment, and it's not really an apartment. It was a loft in on a country area above a garage. So I had woods all around me, and I called it an apartment. And it was Kendra from the VA Medical Center, my person that was in charge of me. And she said, "Steve, we have a hepatitis negative." No, she started out by saying, "Steve, are you still willing to take a hepatitis liver?" I said, "Yep." And she goes, "We're sending a plane for you." So they did the same thing again. I didn't mention this the first time because the second time is much more exciting. And so basically, to sum it up, you can read the whole story in the book. It was a rainy, rainy night in Athens, Georgia, and they were going to send out a limousine, but the limousine to take me to the airport, because their VA does all this. And so, but they couldn't get the limousine people because the storms were so bad. And then the Athens airport shut down. And I'm like, oh my God, I've only got like 8 hours to get there. And so I ended up calling an Uber, and I called over to the Barrow County Sheriff's Department because there was another airport over there. Ben Epps said no, there's no way they were going to open. So I called the Sheriff's Department over there, explained to them what's going on. And the VA got in touch with them. They talked to the VA about this. So now I am driving down the road with the Uber through the back country outside of Athens to try to get to this airport in the neighboring county, talking to the Sheriff's Department, talking to the VA on my cell phone. The driver, I think, thinks we're crazy because the airport's closed. And so the deal is we're going to get met there by a sheriff who's going to turn the airport. He's going to turn the lights on, basically, let this Lear jet, they were sending a Lear jet to get me, land. It's storming like crazy. I'll let the rest of what happens the rest of the way up to me getting to Pittsburgh, if you can read it in the book. But they were cleared to land at any location. Obviously they did. But it's a funny story. There's some comical things that ended up happening. How the airport, I mean, the whole thing, it is just, you can't imagine how weird the world seems to this by this point to me. Now on top of this, everything else, this kind of event took place at this airport to make this happen. they basically said, sit tight. We're going up to 41,000 feet. And a few hours later, I was in Pittsburgh. And then I woke up. There was a lot more between this and this point in the book. But when I woke up the second time in the hospital bed, I was laying on my back, and I had the tubes were sticking all in me. I had four tubes sticking in me with the bags of all this stuff next to them. It was a mess, and it was clean, but it looked like a mess. But I looked down, I could see my ankle bones for the first time in years. I hadn't even remembered the last time I took a look at them prior to being sick, but they quickly went away because of edema. It made my lower legs get bigger. And once you lose sight of your ankles, it's just this space, this line to your feet. And that was one of the things there's a lot in the book that I did not talk about, particularly when it comes to the complications with medications and the way that I was doing things over the years. Very graphic at times. But so this is what I wrote about it in 2022, the really 16 hours of surgery. I woke up and saw my feet, ankle bones, the veins, my fingernails bright white instead of yellow for the first time in years. 4 fluid bags of bile running like motor oil meant it was working. I did a small ceremony of the body to welcome the new liver and to thank the old one and the donor. They told me almost nothing about other than she was 39 years old. She died of an overdose. She had hepatitis C. I felt like I knew her, and I simply called her T, short for teacher in this instance, because the cancer was gone too, and I had a new liver. And now it was just time to heal and take the medication for the Hep C, and I would be a new me. And same me, just recovered. And that's why I wrote, everything was beautiful, and my bile was beautiful too. I had lived. So after this time, I moved back to Athens by myself and did all my changing my bandages myself. Nobody ever helped. I never had I don't think I had ever anybody help me change a bandage. I had the staples in me for the first, I had to go back to the VA to get that done, taken out. And yeah, this was a crazy time that I now had to let go of that. I had to let go of what had just happened. I had let go of my whole world when this began, and now I needed to let go of this world that I had built. This place that was quasi spiritual fantasy. I don't know, but now I was back to being me in the fully conscious, not sick Steve, not sick anymore Steve, who had lived. And so all those other things, the career, the home, the marriage, the illness itself, they're all gone. For the first time in years, nothing to carry. So I plunged everything. So I purged everything down to basically nothing over the next 18 months. And I said to myself that things from the past hold you back as you drag them along. And I had nothing to drag along. So what I did is I packed up everything I owned into some suitcases, and I did what I said I was going to do all along. I had been saying for years that when I lived through this, I was moving to Iceland. And that was part of my just wanting to be someplace that's fascinating to me. And it was at the time. Remember I talked about the Nordic stuff and everything along the way. But Iceland was closed because it was the pandemic. And the first place to open up was Colombia, where as of 2026, I still am. I got here in October of 2020, a year and a couple of months past the transplant, had the recovery. COVID hit. I stayed by myself alone during the lockups. After that, I purged all the way down, sold everything I owned, and put some stuff in a storage unit, and bought a one-way ticket to Medellin, Colombia. I didn't know where I was going next. I just knew I was going to keep going. The plan was at the time to go to Europe after 3 months. Passport, what I could carry, and this is where I met Hooli, who is my wife today. Hooli and I have been Facebook pals. She had been watching some of this whole transplant era stuff. She caught me about the time of transplant, and we'd been talking. She was planning on going to Bali during the transplant lockdowns. I started thinking about as I was gearing up towards traveling. Iceland was not going to be it because, for starters, it was frankly way too ridiculously expensive to go there. Bali, on the other hand, was a different story. I just had to get there. Once I was there, it wasn't as it, whatever. And I was also coming off of now basically not being employed, though I did have contract work, which I still do today. So, and it was remote. So I didn't need to be anywhere. And I certainly wasn't going to sit in that same house. I had the whole house looked like, there's photos of it on the Wind and Raven Facebook page. You can look at them there. There's tons of photos. I had all kinds of Nordic statues and all kinds of stuff. I had banners and all kinds of stuff. It was quite the place, and about 200 candles. And I couldn't be there anymore. And so, just so happens that Hooli lived in Colombia. Colombia was about to open. And so I was like, well, that's the first country I'm going to. So she had said, move to Colombia at one point after we were talking during this whole thing, reply to one of my videos about it on this channel and from years ago. And so I went there and I met her, and we are still together today. In fact, she's in the other room. So that was me moving to Colombia. I will not go on too long about my life in Colombia since then, other than to say that about a year after getting to Colombia, I was able to do something that I was not able to do during the time I was sick. So I couldn't travel, but I had wanted to go to see a taita. Taita is what we'd call shaman in the United States, except these are the real deal, you could say. They actually live in the Amazonia area, right in Putumayo, which is the southernmost part of Colombia. They go out, they chop the ayahuasca, they put it all together, they make it, and they look exactly like what you would think they would look like. Most of them are older, and they're just the epitome of what we think of when we think of shaman. And so one was traveling up to near where I lived in Colombia for an ayahuasca ceremony. They refer to it as yahe here, yahe. And so anyway, I went. That blew my mind even more so than anything else, because so much of what I had seen in the time that I was journeying during the time I was sick, I had seen these scenes. There was several of the scenes that I saw played out that night. A combination of the shaman himself, who was playing this 3-flute thing to where he breathed in and out. It made this most mysterious sound by the fire next to the roaring river in the jungle of Colombia. And it was something else. And I remember we were sitting by the fire because Hooli was with me. And Hooli turned to me. This is from the book. Hooli turned to me in the fire and said, "This is how it feels to heal." She was sitting on the other side of the fire, but the way that she said it, but to hear somebody else say that to me. So that was that. That was me meeting with the Taita. I have not done that since. I don't know that I ever will again, but it was well worth that night. Long night. Very long night. So many memories of that. So this is pretty much the basic wrap up of the message of the book, that we're all in this together. This is something that I think is a combination. This is heavily influenced by Larry Walton and his idea of talking about we all have a piece of the action, which is one of the titles, one of the chapters. But in the end, this is something I was saying. I said about the time of transplant, we are just spirits having a human experience. And just because the fat lady is singing doesn't mean there's no encore. And so the fat lady sang, that's an old expression meaning the show is over. And when I got that terminal diagnosis in 2011, That show of my former Steve was indeed over. None of it was really reclaimed much at all, other than some of my personal habits, such as playing guitar, the bands I listen to. But my life is completely different. And then I went through another life in between. So the fat lady could be singing in life, but that doesn't mean it's over until you quit. This is how it feels to heal. Thank you. I'm Steve R. Patterson. Have a good day.